So let's go ahead and talk about these toolbars up here. So we have the typical toolbar that comes with most applications, and some of these are specific to World Machine. Most importantly is the world commands, the device commands, views, and so on and so forth. But we don't really have to use this toolbar because we're going to be using this most of the time. This is where we want to use most of our views and device commands that we want to play with. So pretty much anything that you see up here you can find down here, besides a few things like anything in the file. You can hit save as, so on and so forth, under the edit. But you have hotkeys that you pretty much use for every other application, so copy, paste, Control-C, Control-V, cut, Control-X, so on and so forth. You'll find yourself using hotkeys, and I recommend using them all the time because they come in handy when you start using multiple devices and they use similar settings. So then you have world commands, which we'll go over all these as we get to them. Nothing really has to change. Landscape colors right here, I already showed you. You can set the terrain color there. You can go here, and the satellite color tables is a plugin, but this is typically where you're going to get some presets that come with World Machine. Typically these top ones right here will come with World Machine pre-built, and I'll show you what it looks like when we actually get to colorizing our terrain. And other than that, we're going to be using everything here. So let's just go ahead and talk about these for now. So first one is going to be new, and this is going to be a new project. So if we hit new, that just opens up a new project. Then you have your open one, button there, which will just open up a project that you saved out. There's your save button. There's your export terrain, which this comes in handy. Well, we're going to go ahead and do that. It's going to have to build your world, and you can actually modify some of the things here, but we're going to have something that we need to build first. So we'll talk about later. Then we have the world extents and resolution button, and we already went over that. You can see we changed it to kilometers. Now it's set to 8 kilometers. See? And then we have the preferences here, which we can go through some of these system preferences, but pretty much you don't have to change anything here. World Machine kind of computes what it needs automatically. You can change it to, so if you have a lot of RAM, you can dedicate a lot of system memory, especially when you have a lot of devices out on your network. It can take a lot of RAM to build your devices. So you might want to increase this if you have RAM to spare, but we can get into that later. It's also important to check always to allow devices to multi-thread when available. You want that checked. So if there's any devices that are multi-thread compatible, you're going to want that checked. That way they build a little bit quicker. Same with the graphics options. Nothing in here really needs to be changed. The paths, this is going to show you like where World Machine's temporary location is, or temporary file location, default document location, macro settings, preset storage, all that, and then UI. But when I go to UI, I'm going to get an error here. Oops, especially now. So if I go back to preferences, if I click on UI, I'm going to get an error because I don't have my paths set up in here correctly, and I did that on purpose because I have my macro saved somewhere else. If we go back to UI, right here, this is just all stuff that you can just set up depending on preferences. Doesn't really matter. I like to turn off devices snap to grid because I like to have my wires that connect the grid to be nice and clean, and I'll show you that in just a little bit here. And it'll actually automatically route wires for you. That way you don't have to do it manually. That's always nice. And so let's go ahead and click OK. We don't have to worry about any of that. Then we have the randomize button. So if we have a generator out here, so I'll just throw this one out here. You just hit randomize. It'll ask you if you really want to do it. You just hit yes, and then it just pretty much adds a different randomized value to your landscape. For all your nodes, actually, any node that has a seed value or any settings that can be changed, it's going to randomize that. Though if you just have one device, like the advanced Perlin device here, all you have to do is just hit the new button right here for the random seed, and you get a randomized landscape anyways, but that's just because we have one. If we put on more devices out here, it's going to randomize those devices as well, so that is a very destructive process, so you want to be very careful with what you do. The next is the node view or device view, and you can hit F5 on your keyboard to go back to it if you want as a shortcut key, and this is just this view, so it just has all of these devices that we can see. So we throw more out here. This is just our device view, so on and so forth. Then we have the layout generator, or the layout view, not layout generator, which I already showed you in the first lesson. And we're going to go into more detail on what you can do inside of here, but for the time being, this is just all what it does. Let's just lets you see the layout of your fractal a little bit more, and as you can see, it just keeps going on forever and ever and ever until you zoom out to the max extent. So very large indeed. Next, we have the Explorer view, which just lets you kind of explore your landscape in 3D using your mouse. There's your bounding box right there. Left mouse click and drag lets you move around like this. Right mouse lets you move up and down in elevation. And this lets you have a little bit more control over where you want to look at in your landscape, but you'll soon find out here that there's a better way of doing it. And I'll show you here in just a minute. It's really handy because it gives you a compass here as well, so you can tell what part of your landscape is north, south, east, and west. This is the 3D view, and this is what I was talking about. This is probably a better way of looking at your landscape because you can orbit around it like this. Left mouse click and drag. Right mouse click lets you zoom in and out. If you just drag in and out, you can just use your scroll wheel as well. But when you use your right mouse button, it's a little bit more smooth. And then you also get these other views up here. So you have the orbit, which is what we're in, but then you have the free option, which lets you kind of move around your landscape a little bit more. It's a little bit cumbersome at first, but we'll go over it a little bit more. And then you have the reset option, which is just going to reset your camera view. So if you want to go back to your orbit, just hit reset and then it'll let you orbit around. And then you have the full detail snapshot, which I'll show you again. We have to have a fully built landscape, probably one with more detail than this too, but all it does is it adds in the extra bit of detail inside of your landscape that is, it pretty much shows all the data and information in your landscape, and it's very handy to make sure, it helps you kind of understand where some really spiky areas are on your landscape, because sometimes they're a little bit more smooth and rounded out at this lower resolution, but with the full detail snapshot, you can kind of see them a little bit easier, especially at higher resolutions. Then you have the use detail textures. So if I zoom in right here, you can see this tiny little bit of detail texture here. You can enable that or disable that. I like to keep it enabled just because it looks nice, but if you want a more accurate representation of what your landscape is going to look like without details or any textures on it, turning this on and off, or turning it off, really helps out that way. So that's just another way of having a little bit more control over your landscape. And then this is show information about this input, and that just gives you the height range. It just gives you the range from and to, so on and so forth. It just gives you some really good detail. So let's go back to device view. Let's talk about the layout view, or we already talked about layout view. We already talked about all that. So let's go back to the 2D view. So this is your view in 2D. You can just zoom in and out like this. You can't really do anything else other than that. So this gives you a really good idea of what it'll look like top down. Then you have your build to current device, which I'll show you what that does. And then you have your tiled build, and I'll tell you what that does as well. So that's pretty much everything that you need to learn inside of World Machine on how to control and navigate around in World Machine. And all these options can be found up here. So you'll find yourself never using this for anything because you just have everything right here. All right. Let's go back to device view and let's set up a new scene so we have something to work with. I'll just throw in a advanced Perlin. So in the next lesson, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about all the different devices here. I'm going to start from left to right, and I'm just going to go and tell you what each device does and give you a little bit of an example of how to use them inside of your scene.